Hey, everybody, it's Scott Steen with winnersandwhiners.com coming to you live from our various bunkers around the country. And of course, I'm joined, as always, by my friend and colleague, Scott Reichel, over there keeping it real on the East Coast, holding down the fort on Long Island. Scott, how's it going over there?
Doing pretty well. Been keeping busy, trying to watch some movies here and there once again. But for the most part, online poker and trying not to die of boredom. That's pretty much how I've been going through from a day-to-day basis.
Outstanding. And you seen any? And of course, the question we ask every day: seen any good movies lately?
I was watching some old movies. I ended up watching Beverly Hills Cop 2 the other day. And I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I thought the original was better. I
Yeah,
thought the second one was going to be a bit funnier, but overall, still a pretty solid movie. Can't really complain about Eddie Murphy in his prime.
I'm falling for the banana in my tailpipe, man. That's a
Yes. I feel like everybody
classic.
has once or twice in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm.
we have a special guest on today, the guy that's been absolutely crushing it over there at Winners and Winers as far as his esports predictions and analysis. He's coming from the great state of Mississippi. He is winning Willy. Willie, how are you today, sir?
What's going on, fellas? Great to be back.
Great to have you, my friend. And we're going to talk a little bit of esports, and we know from talking to you off stage before the show got rolling that this really isn't the heyday of esports. They're kind of just coming down the home stretch. What do we got left on the esports calendar right now, Willie? What's just wrapping up?
Well, you have the LPL finals coming up, which is the Chinese League of Legends professional league between Top Esports and JD Gaming, which should be a really good game. Great money there on the underdog as well, but we'll get into that later.
Cool, and
Yeah,
that's just one contest.
right. That's all that's left there. Then you have the European Masters also in League of Legends, which is a collection of, well, obviously, the Masters, the champions of each league or whatnot. Then you have Counter Strike going on year round. They're always doing various leagues of that as well.
So, well, let's just pretend that some of our audience out there, they don't know anything about esports. They're not, they're not hip on all the terminology and what's going on. Like Scott and I are. So, take us kind of from jump. What are the most popular esports games to bet on? Not necessarily, of course, right now, but throughout the year.
Well, it would be League of Legends and Counter Strike for sure. Their League of Legends I don't know if anybody saw it. They broadcast the American semifinals and finals on ESPN or ESPN2 the other day, and it's not only here in America but overseas, drawing like national television attention, and that's probably the forefront of the esports movement. And then of course Counter Strike is also being offered by FanDuel and DraftKings, and most people are playing that now as well.
Now, and for the mostly uninitiated like myself, are these similar to your Call of Duty games? Are they call it the first person shooter? Would that be right?
Counter Strike is exactly like Call of Duty Search and Destroy. That's the entire game. But League of Legends is a third person. I don't even know exactly what you would describe it as. It's sort of like an RPG, I guess you could say, a role playing game.
Okay.
But it's third person. Everything's done with the movements done with the mouse. It's different, 140 or so different champions that the players can select. And before the game starts, they have a ban phase to ban champions that the other team can select. It's a really in depth game. It's really neat.
So it's similar to a like a Fortnite thing where you pick your own character, you go on quests or missions. Is that how that works?
Kind of. It's kind of a in between that and Apex Legends, which is a not a very popular game, but
Well,
it,
Scott, I have failed miserably in asking an intelligent question. You want to give it a shot?
Yeah. I know that you gave that a good run though, so I can't really,
I
make
gave
fun
it
of
my
that. You
best
gave it the
effort.
best that you could. My question for you is that I actually have some friends who do play Counter Strike, not on a serious competitive level as some of these other people that we're talking about, but I know that most Counter Strike games tend to be roughly 30 rounds, and then you kind of alternate 15 and 15 between defending and attacking. My question is that the same format for competitive, or do they reduce the amount of rounds?
yes, but they do three different rounds of 30, and it's a best of three series usually. Some leagues will do just a one round of 30, but you'll typically see them do, like I said, two best of three.
Okay, so a potentially dumb question then. Since it is best of three, do ties potentially exist, or do they have a sudden death round if it's 15-15?
No, they have the sudden death. They have the sudden death.
And I'm assuming sudden death is the same exact format as the normal way, or is there a specialty thing for sudden death?
It's just one final round, winner take all.
Okay, nice. But so I just one quick question with regard to esports in general. With some of the ways to bet it, is it similar to the way people can bet sports? Are there totals? Are there spreads, money lines? Are there prop bets, stuff like that? How many options do you have to actually bet on these sports?
Yes, it's the game that I mentioned earlier, the LPL finals. I've got it pulled up right here on Bovada. You've got a total, a spread, a money line. You can bet on the individual because it's a best of 5 series, and you can bet on the individual rounds. A winner of each round. You can bet on the team to get first blood on each map. All kind of prop bets over there.
Okay, nice. So it sounds like there's actually a lot of options for some people with regard to props if they're not just interested in only betting on the final outcome of events, which is probably a good thing because, since you said it could be a maximum of 90 rounds, since it's 2 out of 3, you actually get something where you could potentially get more immediate gratification instead of sitting there for, I don't know. How long does the average match take in a Counter-Strike thing 2 out of 3? Probably like an hour and a half, maybe? A little bit longer?
Roughly an hour and a half or so, 2 hours.
And Willie, if you're not a grizzled gamer that spent a lot of time playing these games, what do you owe your prowess to? How do you get your information? How do you basically do so well at it?
Well, there's a couple of different websites out there that have stats for the players, and I'm a numbers guy anyways when it comes to handicapping normal sports.
Right.
So I just use this. I figure out usually using DraftKings, depending on what they score things as. Just use that, put that with the stats and kind of compare numbers and go from there.
Well, that's fantastic. And do you have a play on this competition that's coming up?
Yes, I like Top Esports to win. They brought back one of their veteran players named Jackie Love, who is one of the best players in the entire League of Legends LPL league, and they're underdogs in this match, which I can understand why. The JD Gaming, who they're going against, are really good, but I like their Top Esports at plus 115, unless you mind laying the juice with the plus 1.5 at minus 185. But
So that's similar to a baseball line. We were talking about that before the show started. So they're laid out similar to baseball lines where you take plus 1.5, that kind of thing.
right. You'll see different spreads sometimes depending on the matchups and whether they're playing a single game or a best of 3 or a best of 5 series, but it's really similar to normal sports.
Well, so I asked you about Counter-Strike, and you said that each individual round per se, or each individual game consisted of about 30 rounds. How exactly does that work for League of Legends? Is it just one round, like one game is one round kind of thing, or are there multiple rounds within one specific game?
Well, different leagues play different versions. Some leagues will play a one game or a one match set where it's just a one round, winner take all.
Mhm.
Then you have some that'll play a best of 3. Some will play a best of 5, especially when the playoffs come around. Most of them, the playoffs tend to be best of 5 series, and that's where things can get really interesting because a lot of the thing in League of Legends is the pre-game draft. It makes a world of difference as to how the game itself plays out.
Okay, well, what exactly do you mean by the pregame draft? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, as I touched on kind of shortly a minute ago, each game before the game starts, you have a round of what they call bans, where you can ban each different champions of the playable characters, and you can ban them where the teams can't pick them. And then each of the 5 players will select their champion for play. And then a lot of the strategy itself in the game is based around which champions get drafted and, which player drafts them, because each player has a specific role on the map.
Okay, so a question on that is we talked about Counter-Strike before. I know that Counter-Strike doesn't really have any specialty champion players. It's mostly just which items people buy before the round actually starts. My question for League of Legends, are there any specific champions that you look for to bet, or are there any that you believe are more overpowered, so to speak, than other champions?
Well, there's one named Aphelios, which is one of the strongest ones in the game, and usually when you see him, that character is typically banned a lot of times because most players are good with him because of how overpowered he is. One thing that's interesting to me is how the different champions will have different strengths at different points in the game, if that makes sense. Like some of them are stronger earlier in the game, and then you've got some that just they're really weak early in the game, but the longer the game goes, the stronger they get.
So is it safe to assume that since these are highly intensive matchups, and since it's such a high level of competition, that the competitors who use the champions that get better over time tend to succeed a little bit more in these type of tournaments?
Well, it just makes the other team have to plan around a little bit more. You have to be more strategic with how you attack instead of you'll see when you watch professional League of Legends, you'll see a lot of teams move really slowly across the map. You won't see them really rush into things too much. More of a smart, sort of a chess type of game.
And what is the ultimate goal? Is it quote unquote a capture the flag situation? Do you have to eliminate the entirety of your opponent? How do you win a game?
Okay, so each team has a base on either side of the map, and there's different turrets and creatures and whatnot all over the map that you get gold throughout the game, and that's how your character gets stronger.
Okay.
But to win the game, you have to destroy your enemies. What the center of the base is called a nexus, and you have to destroy the nexus to win the match.
All right.
Okay,
So you have to get strong enough to attack it.
Yeah, and for League of Legends stuff, is there respawning, or once a character ends up getting destroyed, then they just can't respawn? How exactly does that work?
Yes, you can respawn, and the longer the game goes, the longer the death timers get.
Okay.
So you may, like, usually when you see a whole team get eliminated later in, or say, like 30 minutes or so into the game, that typically is the end of the game just because their death timer will be usually 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and the other team just has enough time to get into their base and go ahead and take it down.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to actual team strategy from the high-level teams, are there any consistencies between, I don't know, maybe the strategy a team uses and the success that teams have? Is there one potential go-to strategy that some teams use and other teams don't that you believe creates a significant difference in the betting markets?
Well, it's kind of weird. Each of the different professional leagues kind of have their own style of play for the different regions. It's not, you don't see too much variation between the teams as far as their styles of play within each league. But let's say, for instance, the Korean league, they typically play a slower paced, more methodical, with less kills and whatnot, as opposed to the Chinese league, which is usually run and gun. They're going right in. They're usually kills in that match is within 3 or 4 minutes of the game.
That's okay. That's actually pretty fascinating. So it's almost a cultural thing, or I don't know what country you come from, and the Chinese league, are they all Chinese players, Willie, or do they import players from around the world to get the best players?
Oh no, they're all under contract. Usually, you'll see most of them are from the country that they're playing in, but you'll have some that are not, because they're still contracted players, just like any other professional athletes, so to
And
speak.
Willie, are these guys just? I mean, are they literally kids like under 20? Is that what's the prime age for most gamers?
League of
I mean,
Legends typically seems to be between about 16 to 19.
because I saw something, I watched something on Esports a while back, and I swear they said something about if you were like 22, 23, you're just about out of options. You're over the hill. You're done. Is that right?
Well, the majority of Counter-Strike players are typically at least mid-20s to later 20s, as opposed to, like I was saying, League of Legends, which are typically higher teens.
And is that because of the reflexes involved? Is that you're just at the peak of your reflexes when you're in your late teens? Is that the deal? Is that why?
That would be my biggest guess, or just because of how, I guess you could say it's more of an adult-based game as opposed to League of Legends.
Okay, so basically, if I wanted to start my esports career, it's a little late for me.
You could be a coach.
Do a decent amount of these teams have one specific coach, or does each individual player have some type of mentor or something? How exactly does that work with the coaching staff?
Each team at least has one coach. A lot of them you'll see have 2 or 3, or with one head coach and then assistant coaches. And the coaches are always ex-players.
Okay, so you're telling me that the players are roughly 16 to 19 and the coaches are roughly 22.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, you'll see some of them where the coach looks younger than the entire team. So,
And what kind of money are these guys making? We always hear these anecdotal stories about these kids and Ninja or whatever that are making these incredible amounts of money. What are they like? Just your regular frontline players playing in a league like that? What kind of money are these guys making? Are they making like decent money?
well, as far as a base salary, I'm pretty sure. I know a lot of these tournaments have huge prizes. Like, for instance, well, I'll come back to that. A lot of these have huge prizes, though, and I've seen some will even have millions of dollar grand prizes for like your big masters and whatnot. And then, of course, they're making uh, money off of advertising and all of that as well.
Yeah, I heard that Fortnite had a couple tournaments which broke $1 million for first place. So, Scott, apparently, if you are interested in potentially winning $1 million, you should try to look back into reviving your esports career. Yeah, something like that. Try to bring it back, I guess. But what I was actually going to ask is that you said that each team had numerous coaches at times who used to be former players. Are there any coaches that you particularly like from the former player aspect? Do you believe coaches make much of a difference in the game, or do you think that everyone kind of understands what to do so the coaches don't have as big of a role they might have in actual sports?
Well, I think the coach's biggest role there is just to kind of make a final call with like different subs and lineups and whatnot, because a lot of it itself in those type of games, which it comes from the players itself and their ability, with their reflexes and everything else, just to play the game good. It's pretty much like basketball or anything else. The better players are typically less coached, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so just one question on that. You just mentioned subs. I guess my question should be, how many players do you have at one time in a game, and how many players are on active roster? How often are they actually going to be subbing in these type of games?
Well, you have 5 on either team, and you typically don't see a lot of subbing within the game itself, but a lot of teams typically have at least 2 or 3 people that they can sub in.
So it's subbing like in between matches kind of thing, potentially.
Every now and again. Like, I saw one just the other day where they changed the guy out after the first round, but you typically don't even see that a lot. Typically, they'll stick with their starting 5 that they put out and roll with it. And then, say they get demolished, the next game they'll come out and switch their lineups around.
Well, that makes sense because people. Well, that's one question that I actually had. Comparing maybe sports to esports here, since everyone's going to be using, I'd say, the same champion or the same character and the same strategy for the most part, would you agree that the better team should win? I'd say on a significantly a higher percentage than I'd say a regular sport. Do you think the variance is probably lower in these esports because of the fact that it's the same environmental conditions every single time they play, or no?
Well, a little bit, but I kind of look at it somewhat like baseball in the sense that any team can really win because there's not just a huge gap as far as the just how the abilities and how everything else can go. Anybody can win. It's basically like any other thing. Although it seems easier to handicap when you look into it and just play and look around, explore your options. Because there's so many
Well,
different ways to bet it.
yeah, well, since you have a couple of matches and you have some breaks, I'm assuming, in between the actual games, how important is momentum for esports in comparison to regular sports? Is it a huge deal for
Oh,
live bettors in particular?
well, it's huge for the players, and then for betting, it's hard to find live lines for some of these games. Like I said, Bovada is usually really good with esports as far as putting lines up and everything else. But you typically, it's weird. You don't see a lot of books jumping on the esports movement, even though esports, if you look at the numbers, the revenue, the viewership, it's growing exponentially each year.
I feel like that's mostly because sports bettors, typically like Scott and I, don't exactly want to jump in with both feet if you don't really know what you're doing. And I think that some sports books, even though they could cater to the average bettor who's looking for action, maybe they don't feel confident enough with their lines that they're just going to be afraid of getting demolished by esports sharp, so to speak. Is there typically a lot of line movement leading up to a game?
Eh, Not a ton, not a ton. I'm not. You'll see a lot of the money lines itself move,
Okay.
and typically not even. within maybe a 20th of a juice, maybe instead of from like a minus 140 to a minus 160.
Okay, so in other words, you tend to notice a larger shift with spreads with the juice with regard in comparison to the money line. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, that and totals. The totals I see, it seems like those seem to move around more than anything else. The over unders, once they're set, they're usually set. They're typically it's typically betting on the game to just go the distance, whichever sets they're playing, whether it's 3 or 5. It's
All
typically
right.
going to either be 2.5 or 4.5.
And again, I'll take the role of the guy who doesn't know anything just for the benefit of our viewers. When you say totals, what are they total? What are they betting on? Kills or what's the total involved?
Probably the
Games,
number of games within a set. That would
number
be
of games played.
Yes, the games within a match, because like I say, each will play like a best of 3 or a best of 5. And like for instance, the championship game has an over under of a 4.5, which would be betting on the game to go the entire 5
Right.
games.
Gotcha.
And I'm
Okay.
And then,
assuming that for a situation like that, I'm assuming that there would be a decent amount of juice to the under. Is that a safe assumption?
oh yes, it's a minus 225, plus 160 on the over, and I love betting overs in this just because you see a lot of games typically go the distance because you can kind of fill out what the other team drafts in that pre-draft, and then you can, as a player, you can kind of plan your game plan around that and
Yeah,
kind of
well,
counteract each other.
you also said that the skill gap between these teams is minuscule to say the least. So that kind of makes it seem like you would be more likely to see these longer type of sets because both teams are so close and all it takes is maybe one or two adjustments to switch the tide of any given game. Is that a fair summary on that?
Typically.
Okay, well, for League of Legends and anything like that, are there any specific teams that you look at that you think are undervalued in the markets in comparison to maybe where they should be?
Uh, you'll the lines tend to be about right as far as each time. There was a team in, I believe it was the Chinese league, Victory 5, who was, they literally won only, they won no games the entire, they went 0 and whatever, and only won one of their in the best of 3 series, only won one of the games within the game the
Okay, so they got
entire
swept.
series. So they were
They got
like
swept.
instant fade.
Yeah, so they got swept. So they're pretty much the worst team in the entire league.
Oh, they were absolutely horrible. They were by far the worst team. Like, it was, I was betting the unders and the spread with the other teams, riding that wave the entire time.
Nice. Well, I mean, is that something that's kind of rare in these type of leagues? Because I know that we were talking about the skill gap and how some of these teams are at the top are probably, I'd say at times maybe slightly better, and that might be being generous. I feel like most of these teams at the top are dead even. Are there typically a lot of bottom feeders to bet against, or are there usually just a straggler or two?
You usually have 2 or 3 at the bottom that are usually pretty good fades. You typically don't have teams like Victory 5 that were just, automatically you knew, hey, I'm betting against them,
Well, I
so to
remember,
speak. But
yeah,
you do have teams kind of like the Baltimore Orioles
mhm.
that, they have their games where you can kind of look at them and be like, hey, they might could actually win this game.
Yeah, but for the most part, it's not looking good. I remember I saw something similar to that in Overwatch. And they had some competitive leagues on ESPN that had been shown. And I do remember that there was one Overwatch team that was like 0 and 9 or 0 and 10 or something. And they were by far the worst team in the entire division. And you kind of were hoping that they would get relegated or something. Is there any type of relegation system for these, or are they just guaranteed their spot in upcoming years?
The LCK it's funny you asked this. The LCK, which is the Korean league, actually is in the process of finishing up their promotion/relegation series right now.
Really? I didn't even know that there was a relegation kind of stuff like that. Nice. So does that mean that is it safe to assume that these teams that are just getting promoted, I don't want to say similar to soccer, but in a way, there's a significant skill gap between the bottom level and the upper level. Is that a fair statement?
Well, see, I was thinking that approaching into the relegation series, and I made that mistake yesterday or day before yesterday on DraftKings. I made all of my lineups with the 2 teams that were automatically in the professional leagues, because with the mindset of, hey, they're supposed to be in the big leagues. They're supposed to be the good guys.
Mm.
And then they both just got demolished by the two teams that were coming up.
Oh, okay. So I guess that seems like that could be a potential way to find value in the future. I'm guessing that the skill gap between the upper level and the minor level isn't exactly as big as people want to think it is.
Right, because you typically see a lot of the players that are even in the minors were at once in the big leagues, and a lot of them just ended up on another team that didn't make the promotion tournament. Or I believe that the Chinese LPL league has a buy-in each year instead of they you have to buy in for the league each year instead of a promotion tournament with the minor leagues and whatnot.
So it's
Well,
like a
what is
fee that you have to pay up front. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, I believe you have to pay like an entry fee, so to speak, and then they have a prize pool at the end.
Okay.
man? That'd be brutal. Like if the Detroit Tigers had to pay money to play every time they took the field.
Well, I
Oh,
feel like it's mostly in the format, I'd say, from that perspective, from like a poker tournament, in the sense where you pay in initially, and then if you do well enough, then you can move up the ladder for prizes. Is that basically how that works?
Well, a lot of teams have sponsorships like Nike or Adidas and such. So I believe a lot of the money's made with the sponsorships, just like most athletes in America.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. So Nike and Adidas are sponsoring teams where they just sit in chairs.
Well, you'll see the logos on their shirts. They'll have different sponsorships on their jerseys, their quote unquote jerseys that they're wearing.
Well,
That
it doesn't
sounds.
fully surprise me because I know that some professional athletes have been starting to get more involved in esports. I know, for example, Shaquille O'Neal invested into an esports league. I'm not really sure which one. I want to say Counter-Strike, but I could be wrong about that. Either or, I know that some professional athletes have started to recognize the importance and the increasing recognition of esports. So I'm not really surprised that some advertisers have also started to jump on that bandwagon, so to speak.
I read somewhere that in Europe, a full 20% of the money being bet right now is being bet on, not right now, but before the pandemic happened, was being bet on esports. Does that sound accurate, Willie?
I I could believe it. It's especially overseas. They're really big overseas as opposed to here.
And do they have bigger arenas and stuff? I know I've seen some of these specialty arenas that have been built that will seat 5,000-6,000 people. Do they have even bigger arenas overseas?
Uh, I think it depends on where they're playing. I think a lot of these leagues have their own stadium that they play in, where they're like the Korean league was they actually just got back. I don't know if anybody saw where Korean baseball is coming back as well.
Mhm.
On a
The,
side
the,
note, but
the KBO.
yes, the Korean baseball league coming back. But then on a side note, they went back to their stadium, but they were playing without fans, and it's not just a very it looks like a high school gym that they were playing in. That's a good way to put it.
Well,
Okay.
actually, that was going to bring me to a point or two that I was going to make. So I'm assuming that even though they're still playing in some stadiums and stuff like that, there are actually no fans in attendance.
Over there, right? It was kind of funny in the championship game. They had cardboard cutouts that they had put all in the stands of quote unquote fans out there, and I thought that was kind of laughable.
Well, I still remember that one team in Belarusian soccer was doing mannequins, and you could actually donate money to get your face put on the mannequin. I don't know if you heard about that, Scott. That was actually a thing.
I didn't, but
You can look it up. That's actually a thing it's
oh,
on YouTube, and ESPN talked about it. They were doing some type of promotion deal where fans could send pretty much a scan of their face, like send a headshot and send a little bit of money, and they would like superimpose your face on the mannequin or something.
uh,
That's actually a thing.
I only have one question, Scott. Why didn't we do that?
The issue is that I got stuck between choosing the three teams whose names I couldn't pronounce, that I wasn't sure which stadium or which team I wanted to fully support. I think that was the issue. But, Willie, one question, though. So one thing that I have to ask from a gaming perspective, and this has definitely bothered me when I was playing video games growing up, since everything is done online, is there a potential issue of lag for some of these, or how exactly do they counteract that?
Well, you have right now they have network tests and whatnot just to make sure that their network speeds are up to par before they even play. Typically, when you're not in the midst of COVID-19 world, they play on LAN, local access network, where they're all in the same building and just playing on the same network so there's no lag or anything.
So is that part of the reason why these players and teams are still required to go to the same empty stadiums because of the inconsistency if they would play online from different places?
Right, right. It avoids a lot of issues with network. Watching the Korean League especially, even though Korea is supposed to have one of the best internets in the world, they had so many issues with connection issues with their team speaks, disconnecting and everything else. That they had to install this thing that they called a chroma break, something like that, where they can reset the game to exactly where whatever happened. They can reset the game to the moment exactly right before that, which was
So it's like
kind
a
of neat.
check. It's like a checkpoint almost for these games.
Right. Well, I believe they kind of play the footage back, just find the exact moment, and then they can somehow within the game itself reset the time to there, and all the players will be back where they were. Yada yada.
Well, that sounds like a big deal, because especially considering the fact that, I mean, it's not the same, but growing up as a gamer, there's nothing more frustrating than dealing with a laggy system, and it's almost impossible to actually attack people when you're running into walls. I think we can all agree on that.
Right, and it's huge. It helps protect the integrity of the game more than anything else.
And is that something that's recently new, or has that been around, I'd say, for over a year at this point?
The chroma break is relatively new. They just really started using this over there, and it's something new that like I said, they're really just they're trying to keep the game honest, but at the same time, I guess not repair all of the bugs within the game, because that would be a lot of work for the League of Legends itself, the developers of Riot or Tencent.
Well, I was actually going to ask you a question about Counter-Strike, but I don't know if Scott has any other questions on League of Legends.
You know what? No, I think I was trying to wait for a place to put in my own gaming brag that I once had a 178 on Wii Bowling, but
That's not bad. That is not too shabby.
Beats my high score.
I'm not sure there's any future for me. No, it's a so Willie, I would talk a little bit about what are some of the other sports that are coming up. I know that we talked about this is kind of a slow time. What's on the horizon? What can we look forward to seeing as far as the world of esports goes?
Well, you'll have the return of all of your major leagues coming up soon. They have each year they have a spring split, as they call it, and then a summer split. So it's kind of two seasons within one. And they're in the midst of their break right now, but they'll be back within usually around June, July.
So has COVID impacted the actual schedule of these tournaments, or has it pretty much just gone on unaffected? I know the fans aren't in the stands, but has any events been canceled? Have any events been canceled, or has it been pretty much the way it was supposed to be?
Most have been played, but been played from home and on the internet, especially with Counter-Strike. They've done a lot of their games online as opposed to playing with on land, and they say that it makes the players a lot more comfortable too, being able to play from home as opposed to in front of crowds and in front of a group and everything, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I'm assuming that they've logged thousands of hours on pretty much their gaming chair, so at home, so they're probably already used to the environment itself.
Right. I guess it just kind of gives a certain comfort effort, playing from your house.
Yeah, well, I actually had one question regarding Counter-Strike. Since it's pretty much the same layout as Call of Duty Search and Destroy, for some of the people listening or watching the video who are trying to put this in layman's terms, I know Call of Duty has a health regeneration type of thing, and Counter-Strike does not. Are the strategies pretty much the same when it comes to planting or playing an objective, or is there significantly different strategies because of some differences in the actual gameplay mechanics?
Well, you see a lot of teams, they don't typically, a lot of Call of Duty players will rush, they're running and gunning, rushing right in and going right to it. But because there's no respawn, you'll typically see a lot of players sit back with snipers, and they're just it's a very slow and methodical game.
Well, so when it comes to Counter-Strike also, I know that we're talking about Counter-Strike and League of Legends. Do you also bet on the Call of Duty circuit, or are you not exactly as familiar betting on that one?
I'm not familiar with that yet. I have a friend he's real big into the Call of Duty. He's been trying to get me into it now that DraftKings is offering it, but I'm trying to wait until I can get more stats because I couldn't find any stats available anywhere online for it. So I
Yeah, I
didn't.
know my friend is pretty big into Call of Duty, and he was telling me that Chicago FaZe is pretty much the best team in the entire league. Almost.
Right, I did pick that up quickly. They were the top dog.
And Willie, is there live betting as the games go on, as the score changes and people win multiple games, or even within a particular game? Is there live odds being offered anywhere?
Bovada usually will have some live odds of some kind, whether it be a spread, a money line, whatever.
So, just
Fascinating.
what? Yeah, question about that. So, since you have access to live lines on Bovada, are there any specific moments or times where you target live betting? Do you typically do that often? How should people approach live betting when it comes to League of Legends or any of these other esports? Is there a
You,
strategy involved?
it's odd because me personally, when it comes to like NFL and everything else, I typically love live betting just to hedge. But I haven't really dove a lot into the live betting aspect of the esports. I've typically just been sticking to my guns and just letting it ride.
Oh, well, just a question about that though. Are there good opportunities to hedge with live lines? I'm not really sure how the live lines are set up in comparison to the starting lines. Is that definitely a method that some bettors could use? Is there a lot of discrepancies maybe between the starting line and the closing line, or is it usually pretty accurate?
Well, I would say the best thing to do there would just be if you watch the start of the game and you see a team that's already a pretty decently huge underdog come out early and start really looking sharp and taking care of it early, you'll typically still find them at plus money earlier in the game, much like you will with anything else. And it would be a great time to take the plus money then. But other than that, I mean, the lines typically aren't much different as far as in between and how the juices work and everything else.
Nice.
Very
Well,
good.
yeah, I know we were talking about shooters and stuff like that, but I know that Rocket League's also pretty popular, and I know that ESPN was actually showing some Rocket League coverage the other day. I'm assuming that there are also betting markets for Rocket League as well. Do you dabble in that? Do you know if there's any upcoming events for some of the other esports that maybe aren't necessarily shooter based?
I will play some Rocket League on DraftKings. I will play some of their leagues, but I haven't played looked into the betting aspect of it. I know that they just had some kind of a scandal or something going on. I wasn't too familiar with it. I never was a huge big Rocket League fan myself anyways, the game itself, which it's kind of a fun game to watch, but
Now that is a game that I've actually played. My son and his buddies, when they were, especially when they were like a freshman, sophomore in college, they played Rocket League, and I actually downloaded it, and got the game, and actually played a little Rocket League. So when my son came home, I could play some video games with him, and I learned that I was pretty terrible, pretty bad. It was he would come home and just obviously just destroy me, and I'm sure. And I asked him, I'm like, so how close are you to being able to like you and your buddies? How close are you to being able to play professionally? And he just laughed and laughed about like they weren't even remotely on the same island. So people that people that had no shot at ever playing professionally were just absolutely dominating and wiping the floor with me. So it's a fun game to play, but it's I'm sure it's like everything else where there's certainly a steep curve as far as the skill levels goes. Scott,
Yeah.
did you ever play Rocket League?
I have a little bit, especially when I was in college. I can't say that I ever actually owned the game myself, but a decent amount of people who I knew had it. So I played it occasionally at other people's houses. I was actually watching a bit of Rocket League on ESPN that I mentioned it was on. I was watching it, and the championship game went to an overtime sudden death game 7. So I
Wow.
actually found that pretty entertaining. But it seemed like the strategy from every team was basically the exact same. I didn't really see much variance in terms of play. And based on what Willie was saying, it seems that might be something that's kind of a common theme in some of the esports, is that a lot of teams try to implement the same strategy. And then it might just come down to who's slightly better at implementing that strategy. Is that a fair assessment, Willie?
that's about right. It's weird though. You watch these guys and they're just ridiculously good at this game. Like you could tell they've logged crazy hours here, and I spoke on a scandal a minute ago. I got to pull it up here. It was in the Australian league. That's where I was thinking it was, but I didn't want to say without being for sure. They had two players that got banned for basically they say they say they threw the game, quote unquote, but they were in a position where the game had no bearings whatsoever on their finish in the league, so they just basically gave up and let the other teams have it.
They were
Okay.
tanking.
So they were
Yeah.
basically they were shaving points. They were shaving virtual points. Is that basically what you're saying?
Well, I guess you could say, like I said, the game didn't have any bearings whatsoever on the playoffs. They were already set in stone. I believe they were already eliminated, as a matter of fact, and it didn't matter. So they kind of pulled a Bubba Wallace and just kind of said,
They
"Man,
rage
we're not even playing."
quit. Yeah, they rage quit in the middle of the thing.
I'm
That's a
reading
little
this.
bit harsh, though, right? As a penalty, 'cause if they were already eliminated, is the point that they pretty much ruined the, I'd say, a fair play type of objective because of the fact that any team going up against them automatically won, and some other teams competing who are still alive might have been screwed over because the other teams competing were given free wins. Is that basically what happened?
Actually, I'm reading it now, Scott. It said the motivation behind the throne match was unknown, but many suspect it was done to keep one of the rival teams out of the top four, keeping out the Renegades and keeping them out of the regional tournament.
I mean, for me, that sounds like a good old-fashioned rivalry to me, so I don't really have an issue with that personally. If the team had nothing to gain from it besides potential – I mean, I can understand, I guess, why you might consider some disciplinary action, because if the whole point is that you're trying to build an industry on, I'd say, competitive play, and you have one team that's basically punting every single set, I can understand why that would be an issue. But if the team had nothing to play for, I feel like banning them is kind of harsh. Wouldn't you agree with that, or am I alone on that one?
Well, I kind of feel like it's kind of like the Arizona Cardinals player that got kicked out of the league. What was it, last year, or year before last,
For
for
betting?
placing a
I mean,
bet?
that was for betting, but
And it's just kind of they're trying to keep the integrity of the game because it doesn't look good more than anything else, I guess, on it, especially like you said, in a growing industry.
yeah. Well, are those people banned for eternity, or is it just a temporary suspension?
April of 21 is the soonest they can come back.
Okay, so that's a year suspension. Yeah, that's not great.
And apparently they weren't even good at it. They were like whiffing on easy saves. They scored goals on themselves, and they were even sat motionless during the match. Like the commentators caught on really fast and were like giving them hell when the score reached 5-0. So they weren't. I guess their real crime was just being terrible at tanking.
I mean, I guess. I mean, the issue that you have to wonder is how easy is a sport like that to, convincingly tank. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I feel like if you go down 1-0, you can just do whatever you can to not score. But then again, these players are on such a high level that anytime you're missing something that normally you would make, I feel like it would naturally be obvious that you're trying not to win. I don't know if maybe I'm reading too much into it, but these people are, I'd say, I mean, I don't know how good the Australian league is, but they're probably the peak of, esports players in their respective game. So if all of a sudden they're missing a bunch of things over and over again, I don't really know how you're supposed to hide the fact you're tanking. That's kind of my 2 cents on that.
I don't know that you could.
Anyway, but
yeah, and that's what do you think, Willie? I mean, that's kind of is that something that you feel pretty strongly about, that they did the right thing?
Well, I'm kind of either or. I understand definitely where they're coming from with, like I said, trying to keep the integrity of the game itself, because the market will never reach its full potential if they just leave it unaddressed.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how many examples there have been in the Australian League, but you also have to wonder on making an example out of somebody. Because if you don't punish them for not trying, then other teams in the future might be interested in potentially letting one set go or something like that, one game go. So if you actually enforce it, you kind of have to make them the guinea pigs and try to, I'd say, instill fear in the other teams to not follow in their footsteps. Is that basically what happened?
Say that again now? I'm sorry.
I was saying that since this might be the first case of this happening in Australia, it might seem harsh, but the officials pretty much needed to do it in order to prevent other teams in the future from doing it. Is that a fair assessment?
Right. It's more than anything, I think, like you said, just trying to make an example and say, hey, we're not tolerating this. You are going to come and compete, no matter what's going on. Like, we're here to have a fun game, but at the same time be competitive. We're not here to just throw things.
So, question: since a couple of players were suspended, is the entire team still going to be playing with new players? Or they're just going to be an entirely new team being brought up for the next year? How exactly does that work?
I would assume they're going to bring in a new team because it's not the easiest to replace players when you don't have
Chemistry and stuff like that.
right.
Makes sense.
Kind
To
of
me.
like, yeah, kind of like the Bears bringing in Nick Foles for Mitch Trubisky, who may or may not have been tanking for the last 2 seasons.
It's a question of tanking or just not being good. I actually still think Trubisky's going to start when the year begins. That's a separate story.
You're probably right.
Ryan Pace is in too deep. I mean, it's one of those where either you admit that your draft was a bust or you pretend that he's not, and you're probably going to get fired anyway. So it really, I don't know. It kind of, you can view it from multiple ways, but I
Very
don't know.
good. Hey, Willie, so tell us, as far as your schedule goes and people can read your stuff, do you have anything coming up over at Winners and Winers on Esports? Are you taking a look at this? Do you have some stuff published that people can look at?
I'll have a pickup on the LPL game. The finals coming up here, I believe today or tomorrow.
Okay.
And then, well, over at StatSalt, we have a new writer named Austin who has been pumping out news left and right. Been doing really good stuff there. We're looking into bringing in my Counter-Strike strategy for breaking in DFS. I have a mathematic formula that really helps me handicap the players and whatnot and decide how to make my lineups. And we're looking to bring that in, but we're trying to figure out how to bring it in the right way. If
Are
that
you
makes
saying
sense.
DFS for esports?
Yes.
Man, okay.
I mean, I'm trying to think of all the different categories you can get points on, besides your average amount of kills or maybe your amount of objectives planted or destroyed, that kind of thing. I'm not really sure what other ways players can gain points. Do you have any examples on how some other players can gain points in DFS?
Well, at Counter-Strike, it's kills, deaths, assists, first kills, or first bloods, whatever you want to call it, and then planting the bomb, defusing the bomb.
Mm-hmm. And what about League of Legends for something like that?
But then you have the kills, deaths, and assists there also, and then they have a thing called what is a creep score, which I don't want to get too in depth with that because the game has minions as they call them.
Okay.
That are just computer characters. They're little weak characters that are basically what aids that help you push the map, if you will.
Okay.
And you get points for ever so many of them you kill, but you have to kill like a bunch, and that all comes into play too. And then taking dragons down. It's a whole lot that goes into League of Legends scoring.
Okay.
It's hard to handicap from a DFS perspective unless you're just looking at their kill participation and then their kill shares and then
So
their
would you
kill
say that
deficits.
so would you say that you mostly specialize in DFS for Counter-Strike for all the reasons you just said? There seems to just be less variables attached to it in comparison to a League of Legends or a Dota?
Well, it's easier to I guess to handicap in the sense that like you said, it's not quite as much that can go into there. I don't try to. I just typically avoid the first all the extra side things and stick with the kills, deaths, and assists for the most part, and just because I mean that is your breadwinner, so to speak.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost impossible to predict who's going to draw first blood when all of the players are on such a high level. It seems like whichever player kind of walks out into the open first is kind of, you don't really know who's going to do that. It seems that there's just a lot of unpredictability for trying to predict who's going to get the first kill, etc. Is that accurate?
Right. It's a lot harder to predict that as opposed to just like hey I believe this team's gonna win pretty easily and they're gonna have a bunch of kills and not a lot of deaths. Which
Fascinating.
which makes like I said the kills is what makes the most points in there. You get a point and a half for every kill, a point for an assist, and then you lose a point for a death.
Okay.
On DraftKings, I believe FanDuel has a slightly different scoring system, but.
So I know you don't want to go that far in depth with your actual DFS strategy, but my question for you is, do you think it's more important for a DFS perspective to get a lot of kills or to avoid a lot of deaths?
Kind of in between, I guess. You got to find the right medium because if you have a lot of kills, especially in Counter-Strike, that's going to add up with it being a point and a half as opposed to a point for assist and minus the point for a death. But at
Mhm.
the same time, if you just have a round where you don't just have a ton of kills, but you don't die a lot, you'll still have value, but not quite as much.
Well, for Counter-Strike, though, since it's kind of similar to Search and Destroy, do people on teams have different roles, or is it kind of just, I'm going to go with this person and back him up, the other people are going to go to the other side, or does everyone just stay together? How exactly do the roles work when it comes to a Counter-Strike team?
Well, a lot of the roles come down to the type of weapons that they use and what they're good at, because some players are better at using submachine guns, some are better at using snipers, some are better at using pistols.
Okay.
So that would be a lot of the roles right there. Would just be, what the AK-47 is very overpowered in that game, and a lot of players that's like the go-to weapon for basically anybody, like the new player, I guess you could say.
I'll keep that in mind moving forward. I mean, I'm assuming that since overpowered is probably the most expensive weapon to buy round starting. For those of you who don't know at home, Counter-Strike allows you to gain up a certain amount of, I'd say, virtual money, not like real currency or anything like that, but you can use it in the game before rounds to customize your class and get yourself, I'd say, better equipped for upcoming matchups. So is it safe to assume that most of these players pretty much just spend all of their money on armor and then 8K stuff?
For the most part, you'll see them kind of. A lot of them, grenades are huge in that game. I'm sure you've seen where the flash grenades or smoke grenades and incendiary grenades. Those are huge, and you'll see a lot of them loading up on that. That's where I think more of their money goes to than anything else. Would just be restocking grenades each round.
So are grenades a specialty for some people, or does everybody on a team typically carry those?
Everybody can. Everybody has the option to. Not everybody will. Like I said, it just depends on. Like obviously, you're not going to really want your sniper that's in the back of the map.
Yeah.
He's not going to need a lot of grenades because
Mhm.
he's not really going to see a lot of closer combat.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm assuming, though, that for Counter-Strike, we're talking about League of Legends and how the strategy for most teams is relatively similar. Is that the same for Counter-Strike? How pretty much every team, at some point when they're defending or when they're attacking, pretty much do it the same way? Or is it very unique, the way that some teams go after the objective and defend the objective?
Well, with League of Legends, it's the game of League of Legends is more about team fighting. It's more about the 5-on-5 fighting
Mhm.
and flanking and just how keeping. You got to have the right angles and it just kind of surrounding your opponent, kind of like a wolf mentality or so, if you will.
Yeah, you have to stay with the pack.
Right, right.
Mhm. So Counter-Strike is more. I mean, I know that teams tend to travel in either teams like a 2x2 type of thing, or they have a lot of support behind them. But do you think that Counter-Strike maybe is more based on individual success than a game like League of Legends?
Yes, yes. I believe that that's the biggest thing in there is just having the better play, like the more top heavy, if you will, lineup. If you've got a guy that's just really, really good and is almost impossible to kill, it definitely helps your chances.
Okay, and just one more question that I have for you, whether it's League of Legends or whether it is on Counter-Strike. A lot of the people that are probably going to be watching this video are going to be relatively new to betting when it comes to these esports. Is there one mistake, either that you made or you notice other people making, that were very common to beginner bettors that you started to learn, you shouldn't do? Is there one, I'd say, cardinal sin, so to speak, that might look like a really good idea, but beginner bettors will quickly find out it's a way to lose money?
Oh well, from a DFS perspective, it's typically just don't look at the favorites and just automatically assume that they're going to win, which I guess that could be from a betting perspective too. Like just because you see a minus 1,000 juice doesn't necessarily mean that team's a guarantee to win because it's still a game. I still catch myself doing that in all sports sometimes. I'll just be like, man, they were an 800 favorite. They're supposed to win, but
So do you believe that upsets are more common in esports than regular sports?
I believe it's about 50-50.
Okay.
It's just anybody can win any given day with just about any, I guess, professional sport, so to speak.
So would you agree that based on that, though, the main mistake that you noticed that some beginner bettors use is that they place too much importance on the actual money line price in itself Do you believe that the money lines aren't exactly as indicative of who should win as I'd say they probably should be?
Sometimes I think they'll do the same as they will with others, and just kind of because a team's more popular or has the better record, they'll kind of favor them more into the uh into the money lines and spreads, as opposed to actually really looking deeper into the game itself.
Okay, so you believe that some teams, despite records, might just match up better stylistically against other teams, and you think that that could lead to some holes in the marketplace.
Right, right.
Okay, makes sense.
All right.
That's pretty much all I have. Scott, do you have any other questions or?
No, it's just I'm being a complete. What would you call me, a noob? Is that what I am?
Look at you! Look at you showing off. I'm sure your son will be really proud that that you actually know what that word means.
Yeah, this is to me. It's fascinating, and my wondering, and I don't know that Willie will be able to answer this, but because this has been a sport, an event that a lot of people have been quote unquote forced to take a look at because of the lack of what you were calling regular sports, Scott. How many residual fans do you think will still carry over after the pandemic is over? How many people that were exposed to this during this period of time do you think will still remain esports fans? Do you think this is going to give it a huge boost, Willie? Do you think the worldwide popularity for esports and esports betting in particular will increase because of the COVID-19?
It's interesting that you asked me this, because I was just talking with a friend of mine about this yesterday, and I believe that you'll have some stick around, because a lot of people are going to be like myself that really just took a really deep dive into it, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is neat. Like there's really good money to be made here." But then,
And did you really just start with the pandemic as far as getting really serious about what you're doing with esports, Willie?
as far as getting really serious into it, yes, I always kind of followed it a little bit. Like I used to watch the certain League of Legends that would be on ESPN and whatnot, but I wasn't just really too in depth with it.
Were you
But
betting?
no, I was just trying to figure out what was going on in the game at that time.
Gotcha.
But
So there's hope. There's hope for all of us. If you know nothing about the game, with a little bit of research, a little bit of help from articles like yours, obviously, a novice or somebody that's totally uninitiated into the game could actually make some intelligent wagers.
right. It's like I said, it's a lot of stats that you can look at, and that'll really help you kind of decide what's going to happen from then on. Or if
And
you're
that,
looking at like a League of Legends perspective, you can kind of look into how the team itself, their style of how they play, and it'll really help you decide. Because some teams will be more quick to run in, as opposed to, like I said, some teams will stay back and take their time.
Well, one question though to ask about the betting on these sports. I'm assuming that since these options are relatively new for sports books, I'm guessing the limits on some of these bets are pretty low. Is that accurate, or are the limits higher than people think they might be?
Well, I know that because I'll look at Bovada for a lot of my odds, because they'll offer more.
Mm-hmm.
But being in Mississippi, we can't bet on Bovada,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll look to other books. And other books typically have had pretty low limits as far as how much you can bet, which I think a lot of that's just because you could have a lot of potential, like match fixing and everything else in there too.
Yeah. Well, what exactly do you consider a low limit? Like, what's the maximum you're usually allowed to bet on something in one of these books that you use?
Well, most things will typically have a $2,500 or $5,000 limit on there, but a lot of times you'll see maybe like a $500 limit instead on these.
Okay, so that's not insanely low, like a prop on Bovada or any of these that give you a max of like $35. I mean, I've seen that a
Right,
lot on Fox Bet, where they'll just throw out random props or bet boosts, and it's like, oh, by the way, you can only bet $10 on this, and I'm like, then what's the point? You
right.
know?
My bookie's bad about offering them and only offering you $5 max, and I'm like, well, what's the
Yeah.
point of this?
So when you say a low limit, though, you can still bet a decent amount of money on these options, because $500 max is still not that bad, or you just mentioned a couple thousand. So some of these limits are higher than some people might think.
Right. It just depends on how much they're trying to bet on it. Really, like how does the individual look, and how is their how what's their unit? How much are they trying to bet, as opposed to whether it would be low or high. But for me, $500 is a lot of money. So
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Yeah, I mean, that kind of ties back into something that Scott and I have always talked about on this show. Besides shopping around for the best line, it's also just about bankroll management. And to make sure, especially if you're going to be diving into a potentially new betting outlet from esports, if you don't really know what you are doing, you shouldn't bet like somebody who knows what they're doing. That's one tip I'd give you. And I feel like if you are going to give it a trial run, if you are trying to do esports, you might even want to make a unit size a little bit smaller than what you would for a normal sports bet because of just the lack of familiarity. Even if you're just starting to bet on basketball or football or anything like that, you still know the general rules of the game. So that does help potentially with your ability to accurately predict what's going to happen. For esports, a decent amount of people who have not played the games pretty much don't know anything about it, and you shouldn't bet the same amount of money that you would bet on a game that you actually know the rules in. Would you agree with that, Scott?
Yes, absolutely. That's and I know everybody's getting the itch. I know everybody wants to get out there and step out and make some bets, but
virtual ponies.
Yeah, and I think Scott, we're going to try to line up a show on that tomorrow. I was going to talk about that at the outro here, but we're going to talk about the I don't know what the official name for the race of legends or the virtual race of legends that they're having on Saturday, where they have all the Triple Crown winners that are.
I'm just calling it the virtual Kentucky Derby. That's pretty much what I'm going by. I feel like that's a good way to describe it. It's a good time though because NBC 3 straight hours of virtual horse racing, and I'm actually
right?
thinking, how can you even bet on that? Besides the obvious futures with money lines and stuff, I'm guessing there's no way you can offer exactas, superfectas, tries, pick sixes. I'm assuming none of these exist.
I believe your assumption will be incorrect, sir.
Really? You think they're going to offer trifectas and stuff on? Really? Okay.
Yes, I do. I want to find out when we're done here. We'll talk about that. But hopefully, we're going to have one of the guys from Racing Dudes on tomorrow to talk about that. We're
looking forward to that. So stay tuned for that. I'm assuming that most of the people who are going to be betting on horses, if they are looking for something, are going to be sticking to the outright money lines alongside with the matchup props, probably, because that's, I know, where a decent amount of people go for action. But if there's exacta boxes and superfectas and stuff like that, books can take a bit of a beating on that potentially.
I'm gonna wheel Secretariat on top with the field. That's what I'm going to do.
That is probably how I would look at that as well. But you'd completely just spoil the entire video tomorrow. So I don't really know how that's going to work.
Two birds with one stone. So Willy, any last minute one big piece of advice? We talked about staying within your limits if you're new to esports. I think that's a good call when you're branching out to any new sport that you're not completely familiar with. Is there any one strategy that you want to share with our viewers to get them going, to be successful?
It's just that, like you said, bankroll management and research is key. Everything else will fall into place once you figure out what's going on within the game itself.
Very good. I know that
actually, one question to also ask. I know that sometimes some of these games are shown on ESPN. For some people who want to actually watch the games or the matches that they're betting on at home, are they all streamed on Twitch? Where exactly can you find footage of the games you're betting on?
Yes, they're always on Twitch, and then most of them also have a YouTube channel as well where they're streaming live on there as well.
Oh, nice. Cool.
Very cool. Yeah, because they're probably not always going to be on ESPN. I think we're this close to having them be like on CBS at 8:00 at night.
Well, I mean, we were talking before about the Korean baseball organization, for example, and I know that ESPN reached an agreement with the Korean baseball organization to potentially start broadcasting games there. So
yeah, they start at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
I was gonna say that's gonna be in the middle of the night. Who's watching that?
I mean, then again, when you have to sit through the 7th straight hour of SportsCenter with SVP, I feel like you're kind of trying to find as much programming as possible. So
it's like the old days. They've almost gone full circle with ESPN, like in the old days when they were just putting any kind of sports. The World Championships of tug of war would have a place on ESPN.
Well, I know that ESPN 8 The Ocho is supposed to be coming back this weekend. So they're going to be showing, I believe one of them was cherry pit spitting, I think, was one of the sports that they're going to be showcasing there. I saw a sign spinning competition last time.
You're making that up.
I'm serious. My dad told me that yesterday. They're bringing ESPN 8 The Ocho back for this weekend. It used to be a gimmick they used to bring back once a year for, dodgeball fans from the movie. But since there's literally nothing else to show, they've been doing this for maybe, I don't know, the 3rd time in like 2 months. I
Should
did
be
watch the
permanent
sign
during the
spinning
break.
competition. I did see the sign spinning competition. That was actually kind of funny. But
That's outstanding.
yes, you can actually look that up on the internet. That is actually a thing. But I don't know. There's one thing about programming is that ESPN Classic, I was always a fan of growing up, and then it went non-existent. And now every ESPN is ESPN Classic because they keep showing old games. So, that's kind of how I view the current situation. They were showing they were showing the Pistons Lakers finals yesterday and the Spurs Cavs game 5, the year the Spurs won. And both games were 20-point blowouts. And I'm thinking, why are you showing these games? Keep it close. Try to show something. I don't know. But it is what it is. And hopefully esports can help fill the void for either bettors or just people looking for live programming.
It'll be fun to see. It'll be fun to see what the carryover is after this is all over. Willie, I have learned a ton today in about an hour. That's I'm going to at least check it out. I'll be reading your piece, and we always talk about winners and whiners. Don't forget our sister site over there at StatSalt. What'd you say the guy's name was that's writing about esports at StatSalt, Willie?
Austin W.
Austin W. Very good. So check out Austin's stuff over at statsalt.com. Check out Winning Willie over there at winnersandwhiners.com. And Willie, I know you've been doing really well. What's your record? How many units are you up right now?
I believe the record's 10-6 now. I'll have to pull that back up here in a minute because it's been a couple of days since I've done an article. But it should be up about 3.5 units or so with all the juice.
That ain't bad at all, my friend. That is not bad at all. Thanks very much for joining us. And I know you've got some I know you're chomping at the bit that you've got some draft picks that you want to talk about. So we're going to have you on here again pretty dang soon. Scott and I just done, I think, what did we do, Scott? 9 straight days on the NFL?
Well, I know on the draft we did about 7 days together, or 6.
Right.
And then I did a video on the rookie season props 2 days ago. And yesterday I did a video on the NFL awards. That one's actually going to be uploaded on Sunday. We had some technical glitches, so we're going to end up uploading that one on Sunday. But, I covered the NFL for probably about a week straight.
Yeah, so appreciate your patience, Willie. We're going to come back on and talk a little bit of
actually, one thing to quickly touch on with Willie. I know Willie and I originally were supposed to do a UFC 249 show a couple of weeks ago. Before that ended up getting postponed. Since UFC 249 is going to be taking place next Saturday, Willie and I are actually going to be doing a UFC show sometime next week to talk about UFC 249. So stay tuned for that, and we'll go through the decent amount of fights in the fight card.
Well, and I'll do a plug for myself. I believe that David Hess and I are going to be doing a Money in the Bank special, which is coming up this Sunday night. So we're going to be doing a WWE Money in the Bank. Take a look at that with a deep dive into somebody who is probably into wrestling just a little too much.
Fun fact, by the way, I actually watched my first full wrestling match, I'd say about 3 days ago. I left the TV on Fox Sports. I turned it back on 5 hours later, and they were showing old WrestleMania. And I ended up watching, what's his name, Daniel Bryan, the S guy.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
So he was fighting against Triple H. And Daniel Bryan won. And I said going in, I thought he was going to win, and he actually won. So that's the first time I ever watched a match.
Yeah, and that's completely legit. Daniel Bryan's about 5'7", 175, 180 pounds.
What really sold me was the arm, the arm wrapping that he had, because Triple H apparently beat him up 3 weeks prior.
That's right.
I saw him come out with the arm bandage, and I'm just like, oh, he's clearly going to win. But okay, fair enough. I mean, it was entertaining. I mean, I think the issue that you have a little bit with wrestling is that everyone gets shocked with every plot twist or every reversal. But every match is going to take roughly half an hour, so you expect a ton of reversals, and it kind of defeats the purpose. Am I alone on that one?
No, I don't think so. Although I'm not sure everybody watches wrestling with quite that critical of an eye. But
I don't know. That's one thing I noticed. Where it seemed like he tried to get him to tap 9 times, and I'm like, oh, he's going to break out of this power bomb stuff. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, that sounds about right. But whatever. It was entertaining. I can understand why people like it. I mean, the fans. It was packed. I mean, there were a ton of people there.
And everybody talks about wrestling being fake. And obviously, a lot of the things they're doing, you're not punching somebody in the face with,
I would describe it as choreographed. because people are still getting slammed into walls.
Yes, and you cannot fake climbing to the top rope and then launching yourself, 15 feet up in the air, 10 feet up in the air, whatever.
Yeah,
That's real.
Yeah, you didn't hear that when they jump 35 feet off the cage, it's all fake, and nothing ever happens when they crash through the table.
Yeah, I saw a cage match where the guy like jumped off the top of the cage, crashed through the table. That's like a 20-foot drop. Physics isn't fake. That's still legit, and it has to hurt. It has to take a toll on your body. So I think these guys are tremendous athletes. Yes, it is choreographed. Obviously, the outcomes are known in advance, but as far as the physicality and the athleticism, it's all there. If you like it,
put it delicately, I wouldn't want to be a professional wrestler.
No,
that's how I would phrase
Not
that.
one bit.
Yeah,
not one bit. All right, well, guys, Willie, thanks for joining us, and Scott, thanks for sitting in with me. As always, it's good to be back. Thanks for everybody for watching Scott running it solo. Did a great job as I fought a wicked Hodge sinus infection, and it's good to be back. Good to be back amongst the living. So we'll be rocking and rolling going forward. We've got some plans Scott and I are going to talk about in the future real soon. There's a baseball plan, another a 3-division baseball plan geographically, where everybody playing their home stadiums. This one's gaining some traction, Scott. So we'll have to see. My prediction: I think we're gonna have some kind of sports. The NBA camps are starting to open up a little bit. I think we will have some kind of professional sports. Probably not much after Memorial Day.
I'm going to go out on a limb and agree with you and say that we're going to be getting, quote, some kind of sports, end quote. I'll agree with you on that one. That sounds about right.
Yeah, I'm thinking about June.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometime early in June, I think is what we're looking at. He said optimistically.
I mean, I think that fans are out of the question. I think you're not going to get fans for probably another year. But,
I don't think fans are too excited about going. I'm not sure.
They've done polls, and a lot of people wouldn't want to leave. We talked about that when we did the mailbag episode earlier this week. But I know personally, at the end of the day, it might be a little bit different not having fans in the stands and everything like that. At the end of the day, people just want to see sports. I mean, fans being there with the crowd atmosphere, I think will have more of an impact on the players and the actual viewers.
Yeah, so agreed. All right, so we'll be talking about that very soon. Willie, again, thanks for joining us, man. We certainly appreciate it. Stay safe down there in Mississippi as everybody gets ready to start opening back up. Scott, I know you guys have flattened the curve up there in New York, but still got a ways to go. So, stay healthy yourself, brother. I think about you up there all the time. And
thanks. I mean, we're trying our best, but there's always going to be a decent amount of bad apples who are going out in public, and it's not as bad as Florida because apparently the government's full of bad apples over there. But that's a separate topic. It seems like the curves are starting to flatten, but at the end of the day, you're always going to get a couple of people who just get fed up with staying home, and they're going to go out anyway. So there's always a couple of stragglers.
Absolutely. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. And until tomorrow, Scott and I will be. Like I said, we're going to try to reach out and talk about a little bit of horse racing tomorrow. Probably one way or the other, we'll talk about some horse racing, whether you have an expert or not. We'll talk about that match coming up on Saturday. Willie, thanks as always for joining us, and thanks to all of you viewers out there for checking us out. We appreciate it. Without you guys, you know what? Just be a couple dudes sitting around talking about sports. So that's we appreciate you turning in. Don't forget to check out all the great content over there at winnersandwhiners.com and our sister site, statsalt.com. Until tomorrow, I'm Scott Steen. He is Scott Warneshell. And our special guest today has been Winning Willie, our expert on esports over there at Winners and Whiners. Make sure you check him out. Until then, till tomorrow, you guys, as always, stay home, stay safe. We'll get through this together, and sports will be back before you know it. All right, you guys take care. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.